Released in 1981, Escape from New York exploded like a cinematic nightmare, drawing audiences into a dark future where Manhattan, the once brightly shining heart of freedom, had collapsed and been transformed into a gigantic prison holding all American criminals. Scorched avenues, ruined buildings, and insane gangs turned the iconic island into an inescapable hell. Amidst that chaos, Air Force One carrying the US president was struck down by terrorists in the heart of New York, plunging the entire nation into a life-or-death moment. With no way back, the government was forced to play its last card, Snake Plissken, a notorious outlaw, an untamed warrior with a blood-stained past. In just 24 hours, he had to plunge into the death zone, navigating through the treacherous prison city to rescue the president. Every step Snake took was a test amidst violence, betrayal, and death constantly lurking. However, the on-screen intensity was just the beginning. The behind the scenes of Escape from New York was filled with incredibly horrifying stories. A deadly scene hastily set up in a cramped garage. A professional wrestler nearly losing his life to a real spiked bat, and even the entire city once in an uproar over rumours of a plane crash in the centre. The press at the time exploded, residents panicked, and the film crew struggled to survive amidst the storm of public opinion. And that's just the tip of the nightmare. Now, prepare yourselves, because this video will immerse you deep into the 20 darkest secrets behind Escape from New York. 1. The city in this film later became the setting for another masterpiece. Escape from New York is set in a future. Manhattan under lockdown transformed into a giant prison where criminals thrive amidst ruined buildings and desolate streets. To create this hellish vision, John Carpenter and his crew had to recreate a simulated New York using miniature models. Concrete blocks and desolate avenues were covered in black and grey, bordered with reflective tape to appear as a ghostly city on film. You thought you were looking at a ruined New York, but in reality it was just a tiny world built in a workshop. The shocking thing is that after filming wrapped, the model was neither destroyed nor discarded. It was taken to Ridley Scott's Blade Runner 1982 set, given a coat of neon paint, dazzling lights, and a cyberpunk vibe, transforming it into Los Angeles in 2019. Two films, two completely different dystopian worlds, but sharing one soul, the ruined city model that made cinematic history. But the behind-the-scenes story doesn't end there, because in the shadows of the film set, an unknown young face was quietly leaving its mark. 2. Before making Titanic and Avatar, this man quietly coloured a desolate Manhattan. In 1981, James Cameron was still an unknown name in the film world. He worked for a small studio specialising in low-budget films and was invited by John Carpenter to join the visual effects team for Escape from New York. Cameron's job at the time was matte painting giant background canvases to create the illusion of an abandoned New York with old buildings, flickering lights, and a deadly atmosphere. No one on set that day suspected that the artist meticulously painting every window pane and ruined wall was the one who would later create the Terminator, Aliens, Titanic, and Avatar. From the dim backstage, Cameron honed his observation skills, techniques, and perseverance, eventually exploding into one of the most powerful directors in history. Escape from New York was the silent foundation laying the groundwork for his groundbreaking rise in the following decade. But if James Cameron surprised with his career ascent, another scene caused a shock due to its incredibly unlikely filming location. 3. An American president on screen had mysterious, never-before-revealed British origins.
Anything you want, you just name it.
Just a moment of your time.
Yes?
Donald Pleasance, already famous for his role as Dr. Loomis in Halloween, took on the role of the US president in Escape from New York. But instead of just following the script, he decided to add another layer of meaning. Pleasance, imagined an entire fabricated history the United States had declined and fallen back under British colonial rule with Margaret Thatcher in power. In his private story, the American president was actually a British gentleman installed as a puppet. This explanation, though never appearing in the film, accounts for his booming British accent and creates an odd depth. It was not just method acting, but also a rare eccentricity where an actor dared to rewrite political history for his character. This very audacity transformed Pleasance into a strange highlight in an already peculiar film. But if an actor's eccentricity merely caused incomprehensible amusement, then the recklessness in an action scene almost cost a life on set. 4. The ending scene wasn't shot on a soundstage, but right in the director's garage. In the script, Maggie, the brave woman who fought alongside Snake, fell heroically. But after completing the main shoot, John Carpenter was shocked to discover a loophole. There was no scene of Maggie's body, which made the film's narrative lack a necessary conclusion. Time and budget were running out, and he couldn't rebuild the Silvercup Bridge set. The solution came in an unexpected way. Carpenter brought the entire minimalist crew to his home garage. Adrienne Barbeau, his real-life wife and the actress playing Maggie, lay down on the cold concrete floor, motionless like a corpse. A handheld camera panned over makeshift lights shone down, and thus the crucial scene was born in a cramped, ordinary space. That shot sealed Maggie's fate, but also opened up a legendary anecdote about Carpenter's daring. And if an ordinary garage could be transformed into the setting for a fateful moment, then the biography an actor wrote for the American president is even more unbelievable. 5. A blow with a real spiked bat almost cost the famous wrestler his life. In the fiery arena of Escape from New York, Snake Plissken faces off against a giant armed with violence and gore. John Carpenter didn't choose an ordinary stuntman, but invited professional wrestler Ox Baker, famous for his menacing demeanor and brutal fighting style. The climactic scene is when Kurt Russell has to use a spiked baseball bat to attack Baker directly. The chilling part is that the bat was not fake at all. The spikes were still on the bat, and Baker was only protected by a thin piece of wood hidden under his shirt. With just a small error, a spike could easily pierce through, ending his decades-long career, or even his life. Yet they charged at each other, resulting in a breathtaking fight scene both wild and terrifyingly realistic. As the cheers on screen faded in real life, an entire city was gripped by panic due to a seemingly harmless staged scene. 6. The press once panicked, mistakenly believing a plane had crashed right in the city centre. Suddenly, one day, you wake up and breaking news saturates newspapers. And radio waves, a huge plane has just crashed in the heart of St. Louis. Residents frantically rush into the streets. Fire truck sirens blare, police cars block all roads. Hundreds of people pour out like a swarm of bees, discussing loudly, some weeping, believing they had relatives on the flight. Others stunned, silent, reading disaster-filled headlines. Witnesses recount the scene of the plane exploding as it plunged into the city. In reality, it was all a surreal staging by the Escape from New York film crew. They had purchased an old plane wreck all the way from Arizona, cut it into pieces and transported it to St. Louis. Then they erected it in the middle of the street, adding smoke lights and a pile of shattered metal. The scene was so real that not only residents but also the press were fooled, publishing articles as if a national tragedy had just occurred. For a few days, the entire city was caught up in a manufactured nightmare brought by Hollywood. Just as public opinion was still raging, Kurt Russell made a different choice to protect Snake Plissken's cool demeanor. 7. The lead role almost went to Chuck Norris and Tommy Lee Jones. Into the early 80s, Kurt Russell was still strongly associated with the image of a kind, innocent Disney kid, specialising in light-hearted family films. When John Carpenter nominated him for the role of Snake Plissken, a notorious, defiant and dangerous criminal, the studio immediately rejected it. In the eyes of the producers, Russell could never transform into a dark, cold icon. Instead, they leaned towards safer choices: Chuck Norris, a rising, muscular martial arts star, or Tommy Lee Jones, a rugged face who had made a strong impression in tough guy roles. But Carpenter was persistent. He believed only Russell had enough arrogance and depth to embody Snake. After many tense arguments, Carpenter won. When the film was released, all doubts vanished. Russell shot to stardom, and Snake Plissken became one of the greatest anti-heroes in cinematic history. A role deemed impossible turned into a legendary turning point, elevating Russell to action star status for an entire decade. But the irony of ironies, the film named New York, hardly touched the city itself. 8. Kurt Russell adamantly refused a detail that could have turned Snake into a mockery. Into the original draft, John Carpenter wrote a scene where Snake completes his mission walks nonchalantly and flicks a cigarette butt directly into the president's face as a gesture of absolute contempt. On paper, it could have created a rebellious punchline. But upon reading the script, Kurt Russell immediately objected. To him, that detail turned Snake into a cheap cowboy, ruining the cool demeanour the character represented. Russell fought fiercely, asserting that Snake didn't need ridiculous actions to express his defiance. It was his silent, sharp gaze and slow gait that instilled a lasting impression. John Carpenter finally agreed, removing that detail and preserving Snake's ultimate cool image, both mysterious and defiant, yet never crude. But for Russell to have the opportunity to turn Snake into a legend, he first had to overcome a harsh hurdle from the studio, where completely different names almost stole the role. 9. The film is titled New York but only has one real scene in New York. Audiences going to the cinema in 1981 believed they were about to see a ruined Manhattan transformed into a giant prison. However, the entire New York in the film was actually constructed from St. Louis and Los Angeles. A previous fire had burned down many neighborhoods in St. Louis, leaving behind scorched, dilapidated buildings, a perfect setting for a desolate city that required little staging. Only one scene where the camera pans past the Statue of Liberty was actually filmed in real New York. The rest, from the dark avenues to the dangerous bridge, were all meticulously disguised. A film named New York, yet hardly setting foot in the city. That was a paradox that both astonished Hollywood and made them admire Carpenter's daring. And that daring was even more evident in a seemingly small detail that no one expected. The chilling opening voice came from a familiar face in horror films. 10. That chilling opening voice turned out to be from a familiar scream queen.
The once great city of New York becomes the one maximum security prison for the entire country.
From the very first seconds, you hear a cold female voice echoing, describing how New York has been sealed off and turned into a giant prison. That voice evokes a shiver dry as a death sentence. Yet few realise it is Jamie Lee Curtis, the star of Halloween, the Scream Queen, who once made the whole world tremble at the hands of Michael Myers. Carpenter invited Curtis to do the voiceover as a silent tribute. Though not appearing on screen, her voice opened the door, leading the audience into Snake Plissken's dark world. But if that voice was merely a secret illusion, then a gun-filled opening scene was actually filmed only to disappear completely before the film was released. 11. A grand bank robbery scene was completely deleted before the film's release. Initially, Escape from New York didn't open with Snake Plissken being escorted in prison, but with a chaotic bank robbery in the middle of the city. Snake and his accomplices stormed in, guns blazing, alarms blaring. Then the subway escape plan failed miserably. The scene was elaborately staged enough to portray Snake as a daring and reckless criminal. However, during test screenings, audiences were not very enthusiastic. They found the scene cumbersome, drawn out, and slowing down the film's pace. Instead of adding drama, it diluted attention, making Snake's character less mysterious. Carpenter had to make a cold decision, cut the entire segment. Thanks to this, when Snake first appears, he is already a shadowy figure, a notorious name with an unclear past. That ambiguity turned Snake into a legend from the very first minute. And then, upon its release, audiences were magnificently tricked by the very image on the promotional poster. 12. The image of the Statue of Liberty's head lying in the street only existed on the poster. The promotional poster for Escape from New York sent shivers down millions of spines in the middle of a New York avenue. The giant head of the Statue of Liberty lay strewn, surrounded by Snake and a fleeing crowd. It became one of the most iconic cinematic images of the 80s, instilling in audiences a sense of a devastated Manhattan never before seen. But upon entering the cinema, everyone was surprised no scene in the film replicated that image. It all existed only on the poster, a marketing trick that disappointed but also deeply ingrained itself in public memory. It wasn't until nearly 3 decades later that Cloverfield 2008 brought back the sight of the statue's head rolling through the streets as if repaying a debt to audiences of yesteryear. If a poster could create a visual legend, then even the roaring sound of helicopter engines on screen hid an unexpected truth. 13. The roaring helicopters on screen actually came from real military forces. In the film, every time a helicopter appears, do you shiver at the rumbling sound and the dark shadow looming on screen? Many thought these were just models or sound effects. But in reality, those helicopters were real vehicles of the National Guard mobilized to serve the film crew. Even more surprising, it was from this experience that John Carpenter developed a passion for helicopters. He spent time learning to fly and eventually became a real pilot. A detail that seemed minor during the filmmaking process ended up changing the entire life of the legendary director, transforming his on-screen obsession into a real-life passion. And if military aircraft astonished audiences, then the film crew's harsh shooting schedule created an equally terrifying night hell. 14. For months, the film crew only lived at night from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The suffocating and gloomy atmosphere of Escape from New York wasn't due to special effects, but to a harsh reality the entire film crew had to live completely in darkness. In St. Louis, the shooting schedule began at 6 p.m. just as the city lights came on and lasted until 6 a.m. the next day. Every scene was filmed in thick darkness filled with artificial smoke and flickering lights recreating a deadly prison Manhattan. As dawn broke, the entire crew retreated. Immediately after, bulldozers and city workers were mobilized, clearing away fake plane wreckage, charred bricks, and debris to return the streets to normal life. Come evening, the cycle repeated from a normal city transforming into a dystopian hell, then returning to its original state within hours. A dual rhythm of life, both real and illusory, made the entire crew feel as if they were trapped in the very film they were creating. In that thick darkness, even the main antagonist created a strange impression, making audiences shiver every time he appeared. 15. A notorious antagonist self-added a peculiar tick that made audiences shiver. Isaac Hayes, the king of soul music, when he took on the role of Duke, didn't want to simply embody a violent villain. In behind-the-scenes discussions, Hayes once proposed adding a small, nervous tick to the character whenever he encountered Snake Plissken. Duke's eyes would twitch slightly as a sign of underlying instability. To him, even a small detail would be enough to make audiences shiver, finding Duke more dangerous and unpredictable. However, when the film was completed, this detail was almost not clearly visible on screen. It only existed as an acting intention, sparked by Hayes, but was not made a highlight in the final cut. Nevertheless, that anecdote still shows how serious Hayes was about adding an extra layer of uneasy personality to the famous antagonist. And while Hayes added a peculiar tick another veteran legend had to sacrifice his health to complete the role. 16. A spaghetti western legend had to film in pain after surgery. Lee Van Cleef, a name associated with spaghetti western masterpieces like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, was invited by John Carpenter to play Sheriff Bob Houck, who constantly struggles between authority and Snake's defiance. But when he stepped onto the set, Van Cleef was in poor health. He had just undergone knee surgery, had difficulty moving, and even standing for long periods was painful. Notably, the entire shooting schedule took place at night continuously for many weeks. Every scene where Van Cleef had to stand giving orders, walk authoritatively, or turn around snarling was physical torture. But in front of the camera, audiences only saw a cold, majestic and weighty commander. No one knew that behind those stern eyes the veteran actor was silently enduring excruciating pain. This sacrifice transformed Van Cleef's character into a perfect foil for Snake, cold yet deep. And amidst that heavy atmosphere, a face associated with American politics unexpectedly appeared, making the entire film crew chuckle bitterly. 17. In a film about a kidnapped president, the son of a real-life president appeared. When Escape from New York was released, audiences not only saw Donald Pleasance as the kidnapped US president, but also briefly glimpsed another face with an unexpected identity. Stephen Ford, son of President Gerald Ford, the 38th President of the United States. In the film, Stephen played only a Secret Service agent on Air Force One, appearing for a brief moment before the aircraft crashed. The irony lies in the fact that in a fictional film about the president being taken hostage by terrorists, the son of a real-life president was present in that very scene. It was an unintentional layer of sarcasm where Hollywood and American politics intersected in a seemingly harmless frame. For the film crew, this was like a playful jab at fate, adding more anecdotes to the behind-the-scenes stories. And if that appearance was just a small illusion, then from the very beginning, the film was rejected. 18. A script rejected for years for being too dark and violent. John Carpenter actually wrote Escape from New York in 1974, years before he became famous for Halloween. But when he shopped the script around most studios, flatly rejected it. They deemed it too dark, too violent and unsuitable for audiences at the time. A future America transformed into a giant prison where crime and despair reigned. That was too chilling a vision for a film industry that still favoured righteous heroes. It wasn't until after the success of Halloween and The Fog that Carpenter gained enough credibility to revive his old script. And this time, Avco Embassy agreed, paving the way for one of history's finest dystopian works to be born. Escape from New York became clear proof that ideas once considered too dark to film are sometimes the key to creating legends. 19. The woman Snake met on the street turned out to be Kurt Russell's real wife. Amidst the chaotic journey, Snake Plissken unexpectedly meets a woman in a small cafe, a fleeting character yet leaving a strange impression. Few knew that this woman was seasoned Hubley Kurt Russell's real-life wife at the time. This was also her first role after giving birth to their son together, making the scene even more unique. This blending of screen and real life created a strange feeling Snake, a cold outlaw, encountering his real-life partner, Audiences were unaware, but for Russell, perhaps that moment carried a distinct layer of emotion mixed between work and family. And if the screen could blend with real life, then Snake's character itself originated from a real-life figure. 20. The immortal character Snake Plissken was actually inspired by a real-life gangster. Snake Plissken sounds like a name out of a comic book or science fiction novel. But John Carpenter drew inspiration from real life. In high school, he once knew a taciturn gangster nicknamed Snake because he had a large snake tattoo on his arm. That man exuded a fierce, reckless, and defiant demeanor enough to haunt Carpenter for years afterward. When writing the script for Escape from New York, he adopted that nickname for the main character, then dressed him in a cold armor and an iconic eye patch. From a real-life defiant individual, Snake Plissken became a legendary anti-hero on screen, living on in the audience's memory. A simple origin story transformed into an immortal symbol, concluding a series of secrets that make Escape from New York not just a film, but a legend intertwined with countless anecdotes. Escape from New York is a testament to John Carpenter's boundless audacity and creativity. The film presents a dystopian world that is both suffocating and captivating, immersing audiences from beginning to end. Snake Plissken has become an immortal icon deeply etched in the history of action sci-fi cinema. More than 4 decades later, the work still retains the allure and cultural value of a masterpiece. If you found this video fascinating, don't forget to like and share it with your friends. And remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next shocking cinematic secrets.